Susquehanna Coal Company's 7th colliery was down the street from where I used to live. I used on West Church Street where it met West Main Street, and that's where the colliery was. So when the miners came out of the mine, they would look up Church Street and they would see this large neon arrow that said Borowski's. If you're Polish, that's how you pronounce it. That's where my father's bar was. And when the miners came out, they always came up. There were 5 bars within a half a block range of where my father's bar was. But the miners would always come up there for a couple of Boilermakers to wash the coal down their throat. And then they would go home and get another rest. Well, one of the patrons was a guy by the name of Vic Patinsky, and he was the president of the local United Mine Workers of America chapter. And he got me my first job when I graduated from high school with the Department of Public Works for Nanticoke. And on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, I pushed a broom or used a fire hose to clean the streets of Nanticoke. That's back when men in dump trucks would bring the coal to us. But Monday, I was a thrower. Now, what that meant is, in those days, you had to pack your garbage in either bags, shopping bags, or Weiss's potato chip boxes. And the dump truck would come along, and another guy and I would throw these boxes or bags up to the packer. And he would pack all of this stuff on the dump truck and then leave for the dump that load, come back, and we would continue. I'd throw up the packages, and my friend would throw up the packages or the boxes, and that's what was my first job out of high school. The second year is when I started to work in the coal mines.
What was that like?
Terrifying, at least the first 2 days. I worked for the Glenalden Coal Corporation. I was actually a card-carrying member of the United Mine Workers of America. And I worked for the linemen. It was the electrical crew. These are the people that climb telephone poles or towers and strung wire to feed electricity to all of the mines and offices. And there were 6 guys, 5 guys and a foreman. And the foreman was the guy that also drove the truck. So I went to the yard in Ashley, where the Huber breaker is, and I got on the truck with these other 5 guys, and Harry, the foreman, drove us to this location. And he pulled the truck up at about a 25-degree angle. And he got out of the truck and he said, "You see that shack up there? Go up there and show them your union card and get a hard hat and a lantern." I had no clue what was going on. So by the time I came down, the lineman had already taken the wire that we brought with us. It was about 2 inches thick, and strung it down and hooked it up to a coal car. And that's when I realized we were at a coal mine. And I figured, hey, I'm 19 years old. They're not going to send a 19-year-old kid down in the mines, right? Wrong. I thought my job was going to be to stand there by the reel and stop it anytime they needed me to stop it. My job was to walk behind that coal car. And when we came to a pillar, a post that held the mine up, I would take the wire from the coal car, bring it behind the pillar, and then hook it back up to the coal car and go bang, bang, hit the buzzer. That told the cable operator to let the car go down further until we came to the next pillar. And I would take the thing off behind the next pillar, hook it back up, and we kept going down. The first 2 days, I did not look up. I was terrified. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. By the 3rd day, we were already probably mile and a half underneath the Susquehanna River. This was a river that had been flooded by a hurricane, and they spent a couple of years draining the water out, and our job was to go back and retrofit all of the wiring, all of the machinery, and our main goal was the generator room that was about a mile under the ground. And this generator room was probably 8 feet wide, 8 feet deep, and maybe 7 feet high. And it had this big metal door on it. That was our goal, to get down to that generator room with this big, thick wiring and then retrofit all of the products. So 2 memories I have of that, being down in that mine. Mile and a half under the Susquehanna River. You don't take a break and get the coal car back up and take a break and then come back down. You took your breaks and you ate in the coal mine. Now again, you have to realize there's no electricity down there. So the only light came from the lanterns. So there were 7 of us down there, and that's where the light came from. But what I used to do at lunchtime is after I had my lunch, I would walk up about 20, 25 yards up away from all of these linemen and the light. And I would take my gloves off and put them on the coal car tracks because they were cold, okay? It's cold down there. And I would sit there and turn off my lantern. And you have no idea what dark means, how dark really is. I mean, the total absence of light. And I would just sit there and just be amazed by it. And also that silence truly is deafening. There's a total absence of sound in the mines. I have to tell you this story. We were in the generator room and we had our lunch. And I decided to take my walk as usual, and I came back, and I'm leaning against this big iron door, and I'm looking at the coal miners, and they froze. They turned white. They didn't move. And then about 15 seconds later, Andy Zapotec took his 12-inch alligator wrench and threw it at my head. And I ducked, and this thing clanged off the iron door and clanged off the railroad car track. And he used some language that I can't use right here. But what was happening is that when I'm a drummer, I was a professional drummer. And I'm standing there doing a street beat on this door. And these guys thought it was a cave-in.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, that's how sensitive their ears were to the sounds around them. And so that's why Andy threw the wrench at me and used that language. And then they finally told me why they were so upset with me. That basically was the story of my life in the coal mine. I spent 3 months of my sophomore year in the coal mines.
You know, we hear so many stories because our state is an anthracite state, and we hear so many stories in the different towns that we go to about the anthracite and the breaker boys, and we see the photographs, and everybody's always smudged with the coal dust and everything, and how the little boys had to work, and you know there were no child labor laws or anything like that. And to have somebody tell me now what it was like to go into the mine and to experience the darkness and the deafening silence. I never heard a story like that before. All I saw were pictures of people who have passed that maybe lost their lives in the mines or didn't want to talk about it anymore or came back and got sick later on down their life.
Sure. So, technically I was not a coal miner. I was designated as a laborer.
A laborer.
Working with these linemen and working with those linemen. The first year I worked with them, I did not see a coal mine. It was all outside work. But that second summer that I worked for them, spent the entire summer underground.
Wow.
It was fascinating.
It kind of made you think about what you wanted to do with your life, didn't it?
Yeah. Well, I remember one day my friend was playing baseball up on Kosciuszko Street. And I had just come out of the coal mine, and we were supposed to go somewhere that night. And I was black. I had black all over. And so I walked over, sat on the bench where he was, and he's looking at me like, who the is this? He didn't even recognize me because of all of the coal dirt that was on my face. So I can relate to that.
Wow. But you did, even though it was, the silence was deafening and it was so dark down there, silent down there, you did find some sort of treasure down there once, didn't you?
Well, yeah, I found gold in a coal mine. And those were the life lessons that I learned down there. The very first lesson I learned was how to overcome fear. Because I was terrified when I was staring at that car. And I gradually said, okay, you can do this, Al. You can do this, Al. You can do this, Al. And I'd be happy to go down to the coal mine today. That's how confident I am of going down there. The second thing I learned was teamwork. Working with these linemen. These are the guys that go up 20, 30 feet in the air with spikes strapped to their legs and shimmy up poles with a strap. And then they stay up there for an hour, 2 hours, repairing or installing the cross members and the insulators and the wire that goes on it. And they work in teams. And I was the guy down on the bottom who sent up the tools and the equipment and the wire. And I had to be vigilant of what they were doing, because if they dropped something, it landed right on my head. So I had to be very vigilant. But I learned how they worked and the organization involved in getting all of that stuff prepared. I also learned a lesson about listening skills. We got on a truck at 7 o'clock in the morning and drove to a job site, and then Harry would get out and give the directions to these guys and then leave. I have no idea where he went, but he left. But these guys listened to what he had to say because he wasn't coming back until, 3:30, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And so they had to listen to him carefully in terms of what the job required, what was expected, and also their listening skills in the coal mine. And leadership. I loved Harry, the foreman, because he had this unique ability to tell them what to do and disappear. Or at times he would just sit in the truck. But he also had the ability, he didn't micromanage, but he also knew, I don't know how he did this, he instinctively knew when he had to stick around and when he had to get his hands dirty and when he had to help and when he had to solve problems. And this was great leadership lessons that I learned from this guy. I didn't realize it at the time, but now that I'm into the business world, I realized this guy was pretty sharp. I found some gold in the gold mine.
Those were the nuggets, the life lessons.
Absolutely.
The life lessons. Now, you are also an accomplished author. So we can't leave this interview without having you talk about your life and writing and maybe a little bit about how Nanticoke may have influenced you in some form or fashion.
Well, starting in 4th grade, I got a great English education. That's when I started writing poetry. And basically I became the class poet from all the way in grade school and all the way in high school. The teachers assigned a poem. I wrote half the poems because I liked it, and I could do it easily then. I kept writing poems all my life they would hand one of my poems in, and they wouldn't know what it meant or what the inspiration was or how to explain it. So I created this book, Plagiarism Made Practical, Poems to Claim You Wrote. And you know how most books have, this is a copyrighted book, you cannot use any part of this or you'll die, things like that. Well, I put in that foreword that yes, please, you can use my poem as long as you don't profit from it. But if you want to use it, go ahead, impress people.
Well, before you go, you came all the way to do this interview, so do you have any kind of verse that you want to recite to us, maybe about home or one of your favorite poems?
Boy, now you're putting me on the spot. Okay, I'm going to recite a poem that I gave to my friend in the senior year. And he had no clue what it meant, but I'll recite it for you. An egg sat on a large brick wall to watch the girls go by. Then there passed this beautiful girl who quickly caught his eye. His head went in a spinning whirl, his heart began to beat, and as this blonde walked by him there, this poor egg lost his seat. He then came tumbling to the ground. He landed with a thud. His head was cracked on every side. He was a pool of blood. The story was for you, my friend, to keep you on the ball. Never look at any blondes while sitting on a wall.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All righty. I have to ask you one more question.
Yeah, absolutely.
This was fun. I wish I could talk some more. Again, you came all the way in to talk to us today about, again, the coal mine and then a little bit about your literary career. But again, how did Nanticoke influence you? I know you're not here anymore. You don't live here anymore.
Right.
But your heart is still here.
Absolutely.
I need you to tell me why. Why is your heart still in Nanticoke?
Well, as I said, my father owned a bar, and I spent a lot of time in the bar helping my father. And it was the coal miners that came in there. And some of them came in just for a couple of Boilermakers and they left. Some came there every Friday and Saturday night and played cards. One guy in particular, George Hart. Well, the Nanticoke whistle, they blew that at 9 o'clock for the kids to get home. They blew it to let the volunteer firemen know where to go, where the fire was. And they also, long blasts meant an accident in the coal mine. And I remember one night, 7 o'clock, the whistle kept roaring. And that meant down in the 7th Colliery, there was an accident. And at 9 o'clock, we learned that George Hart was in that accident. And at 9 o'clock, we learned that he probably would never walk again. And I truly don't know how many years it took him, but this guy said, I am going to walk again. And I still remember the night. The door to my father's bar opened. George was a pretty big guy, and he had these metal canes or crutches that he came in, and he had metal help on his feet. And he walked like this and came in the bar and said, Freddie, line them up. The drinks are on me. He knew he was going to walk again, and I always admired that. So these miners taught me a lot of story. Another one of my father's patrons was Pancho. Every night at 6 o'clock, the door would open to my father's bar. He sat in the first bar stool every night from 6 until 11. And I still hear his voice ringing in my ears. You don't know nothing. He came from Spain to work in the mines, and he had this broken English. And you don't know nothing. Because, my father was telling him I'm going to college and all that stuff like that. Pancho was a prophet. Because going through high school, going through college, getting my master's degree, getting into the business world, he was right. I still don't know nothing. But all of the miners and all of these linemen that I worked for, they always said, use your brain, not your back. That was the universal theme from both the miners and the linemen that I worked with. So I learned a lot. And the teachers in Nanticoke were fabulous. Absolutely fabulous.
Well, you've done them proud.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Where the veil of gold is bare.